Now, I can genuinely say that I've been thinking about this for way, way too long. And with the amount of time that I've thought about it comes with the amount of time that I didn't spend preparing it. Uh, it turns out that finding time is really tough. It also turns out that I don't have my other light on, so give me 2 seconds here. So that I'm not entirely in shadow here. How about that Cadence of Hyrule, though, right? Oh, thank you, Low. Um, I'm I'm gonna be honest. That's okay. Well, that's also 24 months for Low, so that's pretty good. We'll say that's pretty good. I'm gonna be honest. I'm not sure how this is gonna go. But what we're going to do is we're going to go through an episode that we recently ran, and we're going to see how we can actually run a game session through the use of improv, knowing that I came into this with little preparation beforehand in terms of things that I've written out, in terms of things that I've plotted out, and instead have to kind of play by the seat of my pants somewhat. Figure out how to run a tabletop role-playing session as well as a stream in real time. And the way that we're going to do that is that I have the session here. I'm not going to be playing it at normal speed. I'm going to be playing it at double speed. And I'll be pausing every once in a while to show you where my thought processes are in the middle of that stream, and also to answer any questions that you might have. Scott was just labeled Scar in a Starbucks, and therefore we have to watch out for him usurping a king. Is that what's happening? So it is not required for you to know what has happened on the stream or in this game. None of that is required. I will make sure to try to keep it as vague as possible, as general as possible. And then when I need to kind of dig deep into what a character is or is not, I will tell you. I'll keep you up to date so that we can be sure that we can follow along. If you have any questions, please throw them out in chat. I'm sure that other people will be able to fill you in as we go forward. Sassery fell off the wagon on episode 58. Funnily enough, 58 is how many Exaltwitch episodes we had. So maybe that's the ideal number. Maybe that's how many we can hold on to for 80 Sassery. So to give you a breakdown of what's going on right now, this is a Changeling the Dreaming 20th Anniversary Edition game. It's been running for over a year now. With weekly play sessions that last approximately 3 hours, typically a little bit less. There's been some bonus sessions in there. There's been one marathon session in there. And I play with 3 players. We can bring this in. We don't need the volume for now, but we can at least show you what we have going on. So I have 3 players that have been playing this game for quite some time. So they are familiar with it, but they are not, in fact, Changeling experts. I don't know how much of the extra source books any of them have read. I believe that there's probably a little bit here and there based on their kith. Kith being a kind of race that you can play in the game. It's sort of like the equivalent of a race or class, although the storyteller system is quite diverse in terms of how you can build a character. All 3 of them are experienced role players. All 3 of them have been playing with me for quite some time. 2 of them are professional actors. One of them is professionally involved in the theater community and hangs around actors a lot. So this is nothing new for most of you, but that's all there for you just so that we have an idea of what we're getting into. Now, this is session 82, which means that we've been playing for 81 weeks prior, which means that we've got about 240 hours worth of content in the game at this time, which is a lot. It's a lot to kind of remember for anybody. It's especially a lot to remember for somebody who is not only juggling what they know about the game, but what the players don't know and what the audience doesn't know about the game. So I'm going to let you in on how I came into this session, how I prepared for it, and let's see what we can do to figure it out. We have 3 player characters. On the left, you have Sophia, who is played by Liz. Sophia is a noble she, which is sort of like an elfin-like character, very much like a Galadriel type from Lord of the Rings, except of course this is set in modern day Earth, so not everybody can see that she is like this, but that's the way that she is. So Liz is playing a character who is very much interested in sorcery and using magic, does not have a whole lot of combat prowess in terms of swinging a sword or throwing a punch, but powerful with magic. It should also be pointed out that for Liz herself, she's very interested in exploring different kinds of characters and how they react in different ways depending on the kind of outward stresses that you're placing upon her. So I can rely on Liz to be somebody who will really appreciate storylines that give her character a chance to explore her own personal thoughts and feelings. She'll also be able to put up with directly attacking her or making her life miserable. But there are things that I have to be cautious of. Because she's not a big combat character, I can't throw her in a toe-to-toe match and expect her to come out on top. But like, that's okay. It's okay with the player to mess her up a little bit, but I have to be careful because in a toe-to-toe match, Sophia probably will go down relatively quickly if she doesn't have access to her arts. We have Kate, who sits in the center. She plays a character named Patches, who is a knocker. Patches is a combat-based character. I'll say that because she's based on ranged weapons. She has a gun and a rifle. The rifle is also somewhat magic. And Patches also has access to quite powerful magics herself. I would say that Patches is the sort of person who is a bit more practical and would rather get something done using a thing as opposed to casting a spell, but that doesn't mean that she won't rely on her magics when she needs to. It's just that Patches is a little bit more willing to kind of get down and dirty and a little less about trying to throw magic around, except for this session. You'll see it in a little bit. She's also the only character who isn't a noble. However, that doesn't mean that she isn't on the side of quote-unquote good in this respect. On the right, we have Scott. Scott is playing Brom, a troll. So as a troll, he is a very large, very strong character, and Brom is also a combat-related character, including arts or magics that help him directly with combat. So he's kind of centered on that, except for the fact that I would say that Brom isn't completely optimized for combat, and that Scott isn't interested in kind of squeezing out every last point of damage that he possibly can. So while he's built a combat-focused character, he's not somebody who I can challenge at the highest levels with, because that's not his focus. His focus is not being the best possible combatant that he can possibly be. And it's basically Patches Knocker. Steward of the Spark is a pretty good title. Weirdness, I would say. I don't think that that's necessarily wrong. I'm going to need more of this water by the end of this session, I'll tell you that much. So, we have our 3 characters. We know that we left them off in a cliffhanger the episode prior. The episode prior, they were in the middle of a basic combat, a combat that had a certain amount of puzzle element to it, and that they were fighting an NPC who is able to hide from view and also has access to powers that they're not fully familiar with, and has access to allies that are around. Oh, my chroma key's still on. So like what? This is... Yeah, so this is vaguely transparent. I love it. I love it a lot. Here, let's just kill that while I'm thinking of it. There we go. So we know that we're starting the game in combat. I've also expended quite a few of their resources already. I haven't been letting up on these characters. They've recently come back from a large adventure where they had to use a lot of their kind of innate magic ability. They've also been using a lot of their innate willpower. Willpower is a resource in this game that you can spend for automatic successes, but they're running low on that as well. And none of them are hurt to a significant degree at this point. In fact, I think all of them are relatively unhurt at this stage, but health isn't actually my main concern. In this game, you can die and still come back. There's two ways to die. There's a real death and there's a chimerical death, or like a changeling-esque death. And a changeling death they can come back from. This character will only deal damage to them so that they can die chimerically. And I'm not really that interested in killing them at this point. I'm interested in having them lose. I don't actually make my players lose that often, and in this particular case, I wanted to push them to the point where that was a severe possibility. But you'll see that I don't actually force a loss on them, because I never want to force a loss on anybody. At any rate, let's have a look. The other things that I have to focus on this game, I have a storyline that is focused quite a bit on Liz at the moment, because the enemy that they're facing is somebody that is directly related to her character's backstory. So the other two, I have to be cautious because they're not the ones who are currently experiencing character growth. They're actually experiencing camaraderie, and they're certainly, helping other people, but I have to be careful that if I focus too much on Liz, then the other two are going to start dropping out of the game. Now, this is our pregame. This is where we kind of, I think I can even speed it up now. This is sort of like where we settle in, we let the chat get in, we get them to, relax and start to accept the fact that we're about to enter into a game. I talk with the players, and part of what I'm doing here is I'm gauging to see their players' energy level. Are they easily distracted? Are they fiddling way too much? Does it look like they're being stressed out? This is all stuff that I have to take into account before the start of a game, because if they are, then I know that I have to be careful individually with them. However, you can see at the moment that all three of them seem to be of pretty good energy. I think that they're excited because they know that they're coming into a fight right at the start, so that's fine. I know that I can't let the fight last the entire session, though, because we've already been fighting for quite a bit in the last session, and I don't like to let my players feel fight fatigue. They are primarily in this for role-playing, for the storytelling and the social aspects of role-playing. And while we enjoy combat, it isn't something that we are completely focused on. And in a stream, combats can often be difficult if they last too long, because it's very abstract for the audience, and it can be hard for them to keep track of, and less interesting to them because they're not the ones rolling dice. So we're asking about experience that they spent. This is just to fill the audience in on what's going on. It's not really a something for me, because I should already know what they spent. I also ask just in case, because I need to find out if they have anything else that I need to know as well. We're also keeping track of the chat here. The chat's kind of an invaluable resource for me, because as they go forward, as they type their stuff in, sometimes they'll remind me of things that I've forgotten. And sometimes through the chat I can tell if people are starting to get excited or if they're starting to lose interest. The number of people who are in the chat is kind of a poor indicator of how well the game is going in a general sense, but if I can see that we're starting to climb in numbers, it means that people are more interested and they're willing to sort of stay. Here, let's see where we are right now. Okay, so right here, as I bow my head, I stay quiet. That's the sign for everybody to shut the fuck up. What we're doing here is we're entering the circle, the inner circle. We're letting everybody know that it's time to start the game. It's for the audience and it's for the players as well. They can kind of continue their sort of chat or whatever, but instead of telling everybody, okay, stop it, I have a specific sign that I'm ready to start the game. And I start the game usually the same way each time, with a jonologue. A jonologue is a short monologue that I give at the start of the game to sort of let them refocus their attention on me, remind them in a small way that it is time for them to stop looking at me as a peer and to start looking at me as a game master, which doesn't mean that I'm more important than them, but it does mean that at that point I do call the shots. I am the referee, and I need them to accept that fully and also to start getting into their own characters. I can wait for as long as I need to. I don't have to go faster than this. I'm waiting for them to calm down. And then I start talking. I do not write the journalogs in advance. Changeling the Streaming's journalogs are usually focused around games, either games from my childhood or games themselves. It's kind of a theme that I came up with at the beginning. But I think of something that I want to put forward for the players to think about or for the audience to think about. In this particular case, I'm talking about how the ideal game in this particular case is some games have an ideal number of players or not. In this case, the ideal number of players that I want is 4 for Monopoly, 2 for Scrabble. In this case, I'm trying to remind them that all 3 of them are important in this game, and that even though we have a focus on 1 player, I want all 3 of them to feel like they're all important for the game itself. So that's why I came up with that particular idea for the journalog for this time. Real Brick Wall, yeah, they're all off the cuff. We're not going to be listening to the session too much, but I'll bring this up. So I yak a lot. I generally try to keep the journalogs within a couple of minutes, and that's usually the amount of time that I need for the chat to also settle as well. It's also a tactic that I'll sometimes use to make the journalogs extra short, or I'll play with the timing of them in order to throw the players off, but I don't need to do that today. They've already got combat to deal with. So, the music stops, and then I immediately change the music to something that is a bit more of a precursor to battle. I deliberately choose the music as we go through the game in order to make sure that the emotional tone is set. This is less for the audience because I'm not convinced that the audience can hear the music as well, and it's more for the player's benefit and for mine.
You're outside, in the garden.
I have to recap. If I don't recap the session at the very beginning, then especially for combat, it's going to be difficult for the players to kind of come in. But I don't need to get all the details correct. In fact, I really don't worry about going back to try to find things because I want to know what the players remember. If the players are remembering facts that I don't remember, clearly that means that it's more important to them than I originally thought. High-speed Chrono Trigger music. If a player remembers something and I don't, it means the player thinks that's important, which means that I have to decide whether I want to keep that importance or not. And I'd say about 80% of the time, I will make something important if a player continually brings it up. Generally, you don't want players to be wrong. You want the players to be right. And unless they said something that you specifically know you don't want to deal with, I incorporate it. But in this case, I'm just getting the information from them.
Little one has finally learned to take off because you have managed to push all of her attackers off her. But she is definitely at the very least frazzled.
And I've established the NPCs in the scene. I'm talking about Little One, who is a dragon that is their ally. I'm talking about Zeron, who is another changeling that they called into this fight. I also have to establish these NPCs because I have an unwritten contract with these players, something that they honor, something that I really appreciate, is that they have a ton of NPC allies, and a lot of them are quite powerful individually. I almost never put them in a situation where they have access to all of them at once. If they did, then these 3 players would not be the deciding factors in battles, and therefore the battles wouldn't be as interesting for them. Sometimes it's interesting to put player characters in a sort of situation where they see a mass battle or a war going on, and then they have to perform a very specific action through the game. But in general, I like the players to feel like the heroes. Heroes, not necessarily meaning good or evil, but heroes as, I guess, protagonists. Which means that in this combat, which is taking place in an area where there are powerful NPCs nearby, I don't bring them out specifically because it will detract from the players. However, Liz called an NPC into the fight, Zeron. She specifically texted him and warned him that there was going to be a problem, and so he arrives, because I want to make her feel as if, yes, you have this ally, yes, you can rely on this ally to come in. I, of course, could always say no if I didn't want that ally to show up, but in this case I did. I also have a sort of wildcard NPC, and that little one is not an NPC that they can control. Little one is still a child, although powerful, and so that's actually a character that I want there as a someone who they wish to protect, sort of like an obstacle for them to overcome, because while little one can still be useful, at the same time they don't want to see little one be hurt.
There are still over 40 of these bird-like creatures within it, and Rogue herself currently floating high above Garden, although Patches is currently a lunar cantrip that effectively will last all of combat.
So when I say effectively last all of combat, I am giving up information here. I'm letting the players know tactics in advance. It's because I don't actually want to start keeping track of rounds and stuff like that. Patches can fly for the duration of combat, and that's all she needs to know. If I make Kate start paying attention to each round that she's been using this, so that can she continue to stay in the air, it's not worth it. I don't worry about keeping track of time too much. I'd rather the players focus on the action itself.
I don't believe you have any current cantrips active.
Floating air.
So yeah,
Oh, right, you just became air.
I'm air, and I also have my fairy ring active in this part of air.
Right.
And I still have 2 rounds of Storm Shroud left, which I'm not sure if I will be actively using, but I think, yeah, I didn't know. So 2 rounds.
Players are always good at keeping track of themselves if you've got players who are decent and who are interested in the game. Let them say what their situation is. Don't rely on it yourself. I could write down everything that happens with them, but I have way too much to focus on at this point, so I'm trusting my players because they've also proven to be trustworthy. They don't cheat, which I wish that I didn't have to point that out, but there are plenty of people who do. They don't. So I can let them keep track of their own shit, so I can keep track of mine.
How much glamour do you have? Willpower?
Okay, I have now specifically made it clear to the audience how much of their resources they have available to them. You can see that both Sophia and Patches, when they hold up their willpower and their glamour, are to a certain degree nervous about how much they have, because they know that this total is low for what they're used to on their characters. All 3 of these characters have actually bought up their glamour and willpower to make sure that they have access to large pools. I've been draining it. That's something that every single game does to a player. Players have a resource, the game takes away that resource to put the players in a position of stress. I've done that with their glamour and willpower. I haven't done it with their health, which is another resource, which is important, but that's okay for now.
But now,
Yeah.
nightmare.
Wolf.
Imbalanced willpower.
Imbalanced willpower. Now, imbalanced willpower is a rule that was poorly stated in the book. It's essentially an issue that players have to deal with. If they aren't careful, their characters can start experiencing ill effects if they start using too many cantrips too quickly without moderating that as they go forward. Kate has been put in a position where she has 2 imbalanced willpower. That's a lot. At least a lot for these characters who generally have 0. And the rules were unclear. Kate actually went and found the solution to this rule. I admit that at the time when she brought it up to me, it was frustrating for me because in general, I don't like having rulings being made and me not being aware of them. But this was a situation that Kate had just asked a question, got the answer, and then forgot to tell me. Not a big deal, and I trust my players, but it was a moment where I just had to be a bit careful to just be like, okay, remember that I actually still have control over this table.
That's actually horrible. But the official ruling is that it's the last use You can have to rule that otherwise.
Where is that official ruling?
I spoke to Alex about it, and they said by the text of, I mean, it's one person on their Twitter account, because the text says, under your last 2 dots. nowhere else.
So this is Kate
Fill up your willpower, that was the ruling I got.
telling me about this ruling and me listening to it.
But in the text of that paragraph, it says, under your last 2 dots.
To be honest, in terms of a lot of rulings when it comes to these things, it's not that important to be correct. What's important is to be consistent. And I need to make sure, because this has been something that Kate and I have disagreed with already, based on the unclear nature of the book. Now I just want to make sure that we both know what the answer is, so that we're not going to keep fucking this up in the future. Because that's a frustration for players if I tell them that something happens when they didn't expect it, and that's a frustration for me if I feel like a player has not had enough of a input in the situation itself.
I think the one we, right?
Oh, that sucks. Okay.
This is your game. Your rules.
It just means that no one will ever fit their mouse willpower.
Liz already has one. This combat is good. This is your
It's
game.
fine, I'll move it. Just because I'm telling you,
Sorry.
over my head.
Sorry. I tweet them general damage. Okay.
So, Marlies, you.
Now, we're 16, 17 minutes into the stream already, which to me is, it seems like a long period of time, but we take a long time to sort of let people in, to settle them down, because also when we get people in the chat to join in the stream, the more people who can start at the start of a stream, the better. You don't really want to have too many people show up once the action has started. I mean, I'll take anyone I can get, and it's great. But then when they come in, naturally there's going to be some confusion. So in order to give them enough time to sort of come in and settle down, we vamp for a bit. We're still coming in a bit late in this game, and part of the reason is because of the rulings that we have to deal with. But that's okay. This is a combat session at the beginning. Everyone has to be on their game and focused, which is, so let them get that focus honed before you start, instead of having all these questions come up when you're actually in the battle itself.
Okay.
Let's re-roll it.
Oh yeah, more elimination.
Yeah. Oh, finally.
I have players who play in different games. Liz and Scott both play in an Exalted 3rd edition game that I run the day after Changeling, which, by the way, is no mean feat for any of us. But it means that they are also used to different ways of rolling initiative and rolling dice, especially because both of the systems are based on the same base system but then have different permutations. Kate's also a player in Changeling. She isn't currently playing Exalted, but because she's so intimately aware of Exalted and played it for so long, it's usually a good idea to make sure that everybody is on the same page when we start a game, just in case there's confusion.
Right.
So, music's changed because now it's time to start. It's no longer preparation. It's time to get people a little more hype about what's just about to happen. Initiative in this game is less important than it is in Exalted, but it is still important in order to establish an order of how people will describe actions. When I roll a die to come up with what the initiative is, I have an idea of what the base initiative of the characters are in my head. I don't actually have it written down in front of me. That's because I know what I want to have happen in this game, and I know the abilities that I want to have, but what I'm more interested in is, instead of being granular in terms of like, okay, is the pool 7 or 8, what I want to do is, how much of a challenge am I going to give these players? What is this character capable of, so that they have consistent powers throughout? I can keep track in my head how many health levels they still have, what their initiative value is, and whether they have any specific resources that they're spending. That's not something that I'm really focused on. What I'm more focused on is making sure that the players have an appropriate challenge without feeling unfair. So if you can't keep track of these numbers in your head, it is useful to write them down, because there's nothing worse than a player who's like, but their initiative was like 5 before and now it's 20. I don't understand why there's such a big range. It means you fucked up. It's okay to fuck up in front of a player, but if you fuck up in ways that seem careless, they start feeling a little less inclined to forgive you for it.
So, yeah, therefore, Scott.
I am going to be.
I'm aware that when I point to players, the audience can't necessarily tell who I'm pointing to, because obviously the camera angle on me is different than the camera angles on the players. So it is something that occasionally I'm aware that I'm making a mistake here. However, in general, if I look at a player and acknowledge them, they acknowledge quickly, and so it's not something I have to worry about.
Having the nearest bird that I can, if I use it here, I will. I'm going to use it to maybe use it as a foil to try to smash other birds away to zero, and reserve half that pool of defense.
As you're attempting grapple,
Yes.
Marley's been having socials with you, which is welcome.
I'm also going to socials and be raise my leg.
Players are using social actions in the middle of combat. There are rules for this in the book. I don't give a fuck how long they speak, as long as it's not too long. I'm not going to time them. I'm not going to say you get 10 words before I stop. I want them to be able to feel cool because we're used to watching movies where people talk in battles all the time. That's unrealistic. You generally don't have enough breath to talk when you're in fighting. However, that's part of the role-playing experience. I want to give that to them. But I will cut a player off if it looks like they're trying to get too much out of their social actions when everyone else is trying to kick ass, because then it breaks that kind of immersion.
I will. I'm casting Pete's using team. I have. Yeah.
I've already started the combat here. Don't worry, we're not going to be stopping and starting as much as we go forward as the combat happens. In fact, I can actually just let this go through. But one thing that I will point out is that
Right, that's the first level bunk. So you're just aiming while they're chatting.
they're taking complicated actions, especially Sophia and sometimes the other two, when they are using magic. Magic tends to be something that they have to think a little more about. They have to think of their bunk, which is how they cast the magic, which reduces their difficulty. They have to think about the effects of the magic, because it isn't as simple as roll 3d6, do that much damage. They have to come up with effects themselves. And they are focused a lot on making sure that they can be as effective, because every time they use magic, they start expending resources. So they only have so many things that they get to use with that. In this particular case, when I ask Liz for her action, I ask what she wants, and then I'm going to immediately move on to the other players, because I want to give her a chance to come up with the pool of dice that she has, to think about what she needs to do, because it isn't essential that she does that in order with the other players. Yes, tactically, it would be better if they had as much information as possible so that they know exactly what's going on for each declaration. However, since I've made this a habit in my games, my players are more likely to appreciate that when I'm running combat, I will run it quickly, try to get things out of the way, try to minimize the amount of downtime that we have so that we can move forward and continue keeping the scene exciting both for the players and the audience.
Leave without removal.
Stretch their arm forward. There's a lot of fingers. Basically.
Do you see the intent look on Kate's eyes right now? She's paying a lot of attention to me, and she's giving me her entire focus, which means that what she's doing is important to her. Sometimes you'll find players who will be like, yeah, I'm going to roll to attack, and they're just like goofing around and they're picking up dice, and it means that they assume that this is either a minor attack, or it means that they don't actually care that much about the outcome because they figure that it's sort of already set. That's clearly not what's happening here. You can see that Kate is really focused, and she wants to have all of it known and understood so that her action can go forward properly. That's important for me to recognize, which means that I'm going to pay extra attention to Kate moving forward, because I want her to feel as if I'm validating the what she is focused on right now.
Yes. You said second.
You'll see that like Scott is mugging for the camera somewhat, Liz is still figuring out her spells, but Kate is still giving me 100% of her attention, and I have to respect that.
Because it's so I'm like pulling on her. Not good.
But she's still smiling, and she's role-playing at the same time as she's doing this. She's describing Patch's actions, and she's being very focused on delivering a good performance. Means that at the moment, she's actually the one who I'm going to spend the most attention to, not necessarily the most time, because she's the most invested in this combat currently.
Your two. Right? 2 health levels,
Sorry, guys.
No, I assume you are targeting usually they're on the floor.
It's not to say that the other two aren't, but it is to say that they are focused on mechanics, or they're focused on figuring out their tactical move, whereas Kate is focused on making sure that she's communicating with me directly. Oops.
Yes.
So go after. Level 1
Sure, yeah. That's better.
You'll notice that Kate is looking now off to her left, to the right. That's where the chat is. For Changeling the Streaming, all players and the GM have access to the chat at all times, unlike in Full Party, where usually the players can't see the chat at all unless they're being fed lines either by me or by Control. This is a deliberate decision. It's how we've always run Exalted and Changeling. I think that it adds to the game and adds to the interest for the players. But you see that now that Kate is checking the chat, it means that she's comfortable with what's happening with me, or at least that's how I interpret it. So I know that everything's cool there, because otherwise she'd either be looking to the chat plaintively, like, come on, like, how can this be happening to me? Or she'd be arguing with me directly. Since she's not doing either, I know that she's taken care of. Why is full chat different? Actually, that's a really interesting question. Because there's always a source of distraction. The chat is always a distraction. It's not necessarily a bad one, and it can contribute greatly to the game, but if you don't have access to the chat, if you can't see it, it means that all your focus could potentially be put on the game, on your character, or on me. For Full Party, that decision was made not by me, in fact, but by the producers of the show. My personal preference is to have the chat available because I think that interaction with the chat is interesting, not just for the audience, but for the players as well. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. Okay, I make sure that I use consistent language when we're playing. I will hit on it deliberately. Round. I will say it because they know if I say it in that tone of voice, if I say it with that amount of gravitas, then they can keep track of things, and then if there's a problem, they know to interrupt me. They will interrupt me if they're not sure of things, or they'll interrupt me if there's a question about the rules. And I want to give them that chance to interrupt me, but I don't want to constantly be like, okay, guys, are you ready to go to the next round? That is not, it's not driving forward. And what I want to do is drive forward. I want to let the players know that things are happening. So Aragorn says having our audience size and the player group size would probably be a factor in chat availability too. It's true. There's also the fact that in Full Party there's 2 people who are used to seeing chat and 2 people who are actually relatively new to role-playing in general, and specifically new to Exalted. So there's some issues there about, like, do we want to give them the distraction of the chat when they might need to be focusing more on the game? There are questions in there. And as Elizabeth said, sometimes she checks chat to see what the reaction is, and it's a habit. So in some games you don't want to have that kind of safety net, in some games you do. So there are questions there. The audience size between Full Party and Changeling is actually pretty much the same. There isn't a significant difference between the two.
I would look down to the tree, still outside, balance on the down the branches, and voice ring, get from the pack.
You feel a surge. By the time you feel a surge, Zeron casts his arm wide, you see there's flowing through his hands, flowing through his hands, he's in free fall, surrounding others, I guess.
Awesome. I'll let you talk the building. Keep that burning.
Okay, you'll see that, I mean, I'm going to scrabble back for just a second because that's actually something that is kind of goofy, but I think actually really contributes.
It's just going to happen. The surge of glamour, and Zeron casts his arms wide, and you can see that there's glamour flowing from his own hands, flowing to behind him, and encasing the freehold. Just surrounding him in glamour, there's now a guest list active.
Nice.
Okay, so an NPC just took an action, and each of them are happy that they took an action. It's an action that none of them can take. None of the players have access to the Art of Sovereign, which is a different kind of magic. And what I'm doing here is that Zeron is very specifically taking an action that is separating the combat arena from everything else. It means that they can't, the enemies can't get into the freehold, which is the in-game reason for doing it. And the out-of-game reason is it means that nobody can kind of start calling for extra help inside or outside, because he's blocked it off to a certain degree to establish that the combat is for these combatants only. The other advantage to that is that an NPC should not be doing things that overshadow the players. The players need to be the ones who are making the most impact. They still have to feel like their NPCs are useful. So I describe Zeron's actions with great kind of qualifiers. I make him look really cool, but in reality what he's doing is he's not any more effective than anybody else. He's flavor. He's the salt that I'm sprinkling on this combat. Salt's actually probably the wrong term, because that would imply that he's salty. He's the oregano that I'm sprinkling on the combat itself so that the players can feel like they've got an ally and so that the combat is interesting but that they're still the ones in charge.
Oh, that's awesome. I'd like to huck the bird that I'm holding.
Yeet that bird.
So yeet that X. If your players have catchphrases that they come up with and continue to use, it's an extremely good sign. It means that your game is healthy. You want your game to be healthy. You want players to feel good about coming to game, and it means that they have this fun thing that they can rely on. If somebody's throwing out catchphrases every 12 seconds, then obviously that's going to disrupt your game. But since all three of them do it, it's a good sign.
Whoa, 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 whoa! I'm gonna swing it up into the air. Sharp foot. What I'd like to do is eat that.
Roberqual, yeah, it was basically based on, I think, Yeet That Baby, and then they just sort of used it in other places, and now I think it's kind of infected the rest of the group. So
As a bunk, like I'm throwing it into the other birds as best I can. But I'd like to use it as a bunk to cast Burning Thew to give extra damage to Patch's gun. If I can do that.
Ooh.
Scott likes to help other players and other characters. He could be using all of these buffs on himself, and honestly that wouldn't necessarily be a bad deal because he's strong as we've seen before. But he tends to throw things on other characters, especially Patches, because Patches is the other combat spec character in this game. It's something to keep in mind for me because it means that he is trying to be a team player, first of all. It also means that he isn't required, like, for him to feel like he's succeeded in a combat, he doesn't have to be the one to deliver the killing blow, because if he was feeling that way, he would just be buffing himself constantly. Clearly that's not what his reaction is, so it means that I can relax a little bit in terms of letting Scott have the highlight. He doesn't need it right now. Sometimes that can change, obviously. He might feel at one point that he really needs a win, and he'll start buffing himself. But the instant that a player is starting to become helpful for other people, it means that you can be relatively okay to make sure that they aren't the ones with the highlights.
Can I see? I can.
Inspiration?
Yeah,
Okay.
depends.
As long as you're conscious one.
Braum does not have any merit
Don't waste the cantrip.
for this.
I'm going for it. Go. Is this crop or chimera? It's a treasure, right?
It's prop.
So he's asking me specifics when he's trying to roll his magic, depending on what his target is. When he asks, it is not important that I get the right answer. It's important that I give a consistent answer. In this case, I believe it was the right answer, but in fact, the most important thing is to get an answer quickly so we can keep moving.
Way too complicated.
That's fair. So I'm gonna spend my last lemon to do that.
Patches.
And success.
I want to fire the aiming dart into her.
I didn't expect this. What Kate has done in this particular case is used a secondary function of her rifle in order to make sure that she can't miss, or rather it's very unlikely for her to miss, even if she doesn't have line of sight on on her target. And I had created NPCs that could shield this character from all sides because I wanted to make it difficult for them to hit her. And then she brought out the homing dart, which is an aspect of her rifle, and I had forgotten that this was something that she could do, and realized at this point that I could either make it so that it was useless, or I could accept the fact that she successfully outwitted me. I chose the latter.
And say, like, as I do, as just the first trigger, this is just make sure you stick to your word, and then.
Right. I want you to roll
Yeah.
first.
Because at the moment they're parlaying, the two characters, they're not, in fact, in direct combat, because this is a sort of a hostage situation, but it's a double cross. Patches has an object that the big bad guy wants, but she in fact doesn't have it. She has a facsimile of it, which I've decided it could have been possible for her to know that it was fake, but I thought, where's the fun in that, right? Like, so that she can feel good about disrupting Kate's plan before it comes to fruition. Nah, the plan was good, the plan was solid, and it doesn't cost me much to give her a couple of rounds of, but wait a minute, this isn't what I wanted, so that the players can feel good about their plan succeeding and then moving forward.
Because you're going to hit her. We're going to see if you can successfully do it without attracting attention, because I'm going to try to take it for her. So I want you to roll your wits at firearms.
Now, this is my compromise. Yes, she's using a homing dart to attach a tracer, or sorry, like a homing signal to the bad guy. The bad guy in this case is Marley. The other thing is that I don't like it when players take social actions and then casually throw violence off as if it's just like, yeah, they'll put up with the fact that I fired my gun while we were talking. Like, no one's going to get pissed about that. And I don't typically like that because it sort of breaks, to me, the sort of bond. Because if I just started naturally talking to them as an NPC and then abruptly just shot one of them, then once that might be interesting, but if it happens all the time, then players will never talk to NPCs again. They'll shoot first and ask questions never. So because I want to penalize this behavior, not the player did something completely in character incorrect, but because I don't want to encourage this sort of behavior, I make sure that there is an extra roll that has to be put on to see if she's going to get away with it.
Nice.
It's the same tool.
It's a good rule.
Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, okay, good. So do you have 6 or something more?
The difficulty is 6, but you're
Okay.
being countered by me. If I roll as many or more
Okay.
successes than you, then a bird recognizes what you're trying to do.
Cool.
I roll open dice. It's the way it is. A lot of players use a screen. I do not. I don't, however, always roll obviously in front of the players. If it's a roll that I think I might need to fudge, I will roll it, I'll look at it, and then scoop the dice. But I don't always... I don't fudge often, and I definitely don't like rolling behind a screen because it implies a lack of trust between me and my players, which if I had a whole lot of notes in front of me, they'd understand why I wasn't showing it off. But because I don't have notes in front of me, I'd rather be open to them. I also feel like it kind of eliminates clutter on the desk.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Well, that's going to be really hard for me to match. And it was. All right, so 2 successes for me. And as you fire, so dart goes in, and then immediately the birds just slam shut around.
I make sure that after she succeeds in this maneuver that was tricky and not necessarily like the most honorable of solutions, that she's aware of it and that the birds shut close. That's the shield that she has in front of her, so that they know that combat is going to continue and that she doesn't necessarily get to get away with it entirely.
Then I transfer the gun, and I can still deeply aiming. Obviously, I'll be at a disadvantage. I have to shoot it, and then something other round.
You have the dex rolls.
No. So, like,
You
I mean,
have -2 penalty?
yes.
Or sorry, +2 difficulty
Yeah.
at this point until you
So, like,
get back to
yeah.
it. It's also
It could be like
rifles
50.
basically
The old
Yeah,
one-hander?
yeah.
So if
It's
I'm
more of
actually
a-
going to judge that right now, it's a little more than one shot.
Yeah, exactly. Better than nothing.
And I'll give you 2 damage for 3 rounds.
Okay.
Nice.
That makes the most sense.
Okay.
So, you'll notice that while Kate performed a relatively complicated action, Brom, in the meantime, or Scott, was completing his cantrip and making sure that he knew what the successes were so that he could tell Kate at an appropriate time. I don't adjudicate this, and I don't need him to tell me the successes. I don't need to be the one to tell Kate what the answer is. Scott knows it just as well as I do, in some cases more so, because he has the text in front of him. And I've gotten past the point where I can memorize everything in every book and every game that I play. So I let him do it. It means we don't waste time.
And you hear this like screech as it attaches. Remember, so what she's fired is a tracer. So now no matter where she aims, the bullet will try to find its way there. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good.
I remind everybody about what the action is for the tracer round, not because Kate needs that information, not even because necessarily Liz or Scott need that information, but it's for the audience. However, it's good to reestablish it when I put it down, because if I've got it wrong, the players will correct me, or if I have it and the players thought otherwise, then they'll understand that what they thought previously was incorrect. I'm establishing this now, it doesn't take that long, and it means that everybody is aware of what's happening in the future. I would rather do this before it becomes a problem than have her take an action, be say, that's impossible, and then have the player be frustrated because now they don't know what to do. And they feel pressure, not only because now they're holding up the game, but because the audience is watching as well.
Except of course right now she can't actually control the roll. It's just holding it in one hand. The birds, as well, turn to cast the fight. You can see a little touching circle. Special. So this, and we're still. She's so confused, especially based on the action.
Okay, now Liz is giving me all of her attention, and I have noticed this. She's keeping her eyes on me. Scott is also, but she's occasionally glancing off at the chat. Kate hasn't really let off, but it means that I still have the player's attention. I know that combat is running relatively smoothly.
You just go, oh, coach.
Any other round? Is that everyone? No. Okay, so the track one.
That's what we do. You start using the roll is pretty high, and it is
Now, they're using the NPC to attack the character. Braum is throwing Zeron essentially at the bad guy. I'm okay with this. This is because it involves Braum and makes him feel like he's useful for this. It's also because Zeron is Braum's protege to a certain degree, if Braum remembers. And so it means that he's helping out somebody who is a dear friend and ally to him, which means that we're not taking it away from them. It's not a random shadow NPC shows up, kicks all sorts of ass, and then leaves, and I get to feel like I have a big dick swinging around and the players feel disappointed. This is a character that they have called upon, so I am like, all right, no problem. You can contribute to the fight this way. Out of all of my players, Kate is probably the one who is the most related to a tactician. Tacticians are the antithesis of storytellers. This is in terms of Robbins Laws of Gaming's player types, because tacticians like to spend a lot of time figuring things out before they do something, and storytellers like to spend as little time as possible because they want to get on with telling the story. Now, this isn't Kate's primary this isn't her primary kind of player type, is tactician. I don't believe it is, but it is something that I have to watch out for. However, Kate also is somebody who I can trust with it because she is well aware that the game can't continue as long as she's talking about her strategizing. However, the strategizing is important for her. It clearly matters for her, and it clearly is something that she gets an emotional kick out of, and I want to engage that as much as possible without ruining the game for everybody else at the table. Kate is a considerate player, so she gets to be a tactician. If she wasn't a considerate player, I would shut her off. I would cut it off and I would say it's this or it's this, and she can choose. And I would make sure that that choice came with either an implied or an explicit time limit. Kate, however, is somebody who I have been playing with for a long time now. I trust her, so she gets to be the tactician that she wants to be. And honestly, it makes the game better. This is probably an example of the first time that I've had a tactician sitting down at a table with me where I felt like it's an addition to the game instead of a detraction. That's not to say that tacticians are bad role players, but that when it comes to my style, tacticians often don't make the grade. They don't make the kind of game that I want to put forward in the game. So that speaks well on Kate. It is, however, because I encourage her to do this, to engage in tactics, it is something that I have to be a little bit careful about, because if I don't give her the chance to use those tactics, then I'm cheating her. And if you have any questions, please just throw them at me. I'm just letting the combat play out because there's a lot of session to get through. You'll notice that I changed the music again. It's because we're entering into another phase of the combat, and I want them to be aware of that.
Big one for me, so I went last.
16.
And 17.
I still do worse than 9. How about that?
Wow,
That's pretty impressive.
I rolled 3.
This round, Marley is going to discover them. So I'm warning.
So I'm warning them in advance. This round, Marley is going to discover that the MacGuffin that she's holding isn't actually the correct MacGuffin. It's a fake. I'm telling them this because not only did they score well on their initiative and so they deserve to know, but because that information is to imply that the combat is about to get more intense. It's not because I want to give them better tactical information. I'm emotionally prepping the players and the audience.
Oh, thank you.
You can't see her, so you can no longer see what she's doing, but you are going to hear her cry out in frustration and desperation. So you know that shit's going to come back on. Therefore, I recommend that you take that under consideration as we move forward.
Okay, all right, okay.
So, who's next?
There's also an advantage sometimes of warning players shit's about to hit the fan. It's an easy way to ramp up the tension without having to actually have the shit hit the fan without them knowing.
Liz is doing
I think it's
this.
me. Well, then, now she can discover it on her turn,
She's discovering it this turn.
but at her action,
It
or at the
doesn't
beginning
take
of the round.
She'll be able to take an action next round. This round, her only action is going to be to scream defiance as she realizes that
The music has now become more intense and more bass filled, and it's also no longer 16-bit but now orchestrated. It's a deliberate choice. It's because things are about to get serious pretty quickly.
code is not real. She has been bunking this whole time, so you can presume she still is. But she isn't going to take an action.
All right, then I would like to change the target of my burden recognition to Marley, and I will be casting it this round.
By making sure that she was given the information, she's now able to make a better choice as to what she wants to do in this round. So Liz will be happier with her choice.
Can't see her.
Right, she's behind the wall?
Yes.
Go for it. Can I float to the other side of the wall? They haven't seen me yet.
That would be your action.
Okay, that's not me.
She has given me an alternative. I've said that that's what it is, but I'm making it clear that's your action, and she accepts it. I have to remember, though, because she did that and she's wasting an entire round maneuvering, that I want to make sure that she gets a chance to feel like that was a useful action later on. If I say, oh yeah, you move around, and oh hey, guess what? There's still a shield here. Ha ha ha! You just wasted a whole turn. I've literally wasted minutes of my player feeling good, and I don't want to do that. There's a delicate balance between having my own strategy and having players not always be correct, and having players feel good.
Yeah, stop, sir.
You're just firing
Yep.
over. Okay.
Like warning shot, like back
A
off,
warning
you got
shot?
it.
You
No,
fire a warning
no,
shot and
no,
go for the
it's not.
tracer?
Yeah, I know. Back off, you got it now.
Oh shit.
If Kate's winking in a game, you know she's having a good time.
Could I theoretically throw Zeron up as high as they are?
Yes. You have strength, what, 6?
6.
Yes.
Okay, so
That's
I
not even under debate. You can throw them higher.
That's awesome.
He doesn't weigh that much. He's a she.
Is that true? All right, so
Wait,
I'm
so where it counts?
Wow, Zers. Yeah, that was good. So I'm
That was nice. That was a high five.
You'll notice that sometimes I reach across the table to high five a player. It's often Liz. That's because I want to encourage that the table feels like it's a bunch of friends hanging out and have that camaraderie. That camaraderie is important to me. And even though it makes for some awkward camera angles, that moment of connection between GM and player is actually an important one. But it's also an important moment between friends.
That was like a figure skating.
I'm going to again cast Burning Through on Sir Zeron. My bunk will be to slam my feet into the ground and like.
I'm also noticing that Liz is turning her microphone off, turning off screen, and she's basically getting over either a cold or a flu or something that's causing her to cough and to have a runny nose. I take that into account. I clock that her energy might be different because she is getting over an illness, but I can't let it interrupt the game. I also don't want to sit there and wait so that the stream can listen to her blow her nose. So I'll focus on other people.
Get ready to propulse him up into the air with the power of the dragon coursing through his foot.
Okay, Zeron is going to let loose his bunk. He's going to use Wayfarer so that he can get back down. Which is but actually, no, he's not.
You'll notice that I changed my action here. It's because, yeah, I could have Zeron use Wayfarer so that he can land safely, or I can have Zeron make a player feel good.
He's not. He's going to cast Quicksilver on Patches.
So he uses magic to buff Patches. You'll see that Kate's eyes are bugging here, which is actually a great freeze frame. I absolutely love this. We've previously established in the games, in a game quite a few sessions ago, that Zeron and Patches have fought together and have sort of like that we've spilled blood in the same mud kind of attitude. So Zeron is likely to help Patches because he can trust her with it. This is also a way to sort of show the NPC is here to support the players, not to steal the show.
Matt, Zeron. I love throwing things in games, guys.
Patches, you're going to get an extra
I love throwing things in games. If a player tells you something, remember it.
3 actions next round. Okay.
Yeah.
I want you to roll your dex firearms. I want you to roll your.
Cantrip?
So your dex firearms is at a difficulty of 5, even though you shouldn't normally be able to hit.
And do I have a diff because of my bunk for the cantrip there?
You just yeeted a she, so we're going to say that that's a level 3 bunk.
Wow, thanks.
You'll notice that I'm giving them relatively good rolls here. It's because things haven't gone to hell yet, and I want to give them a feeling like they are in control and doing well. They are doing well, and I'm not being dishonest here. But as stories go, if you're just constantly fucking like destroying them, and they pull out at the last second, that's not going to feel as emotionally good as they feel good about things, then they don't. Then they feel a bit better about things, and then the real bad thing happens, and then they manage to make it out of it. It's a better arc for characters. You can't always hit it, but it's something that you kind of want to give. The best fights that you remember are fights that aren't constantly one-sided until the very end.
Yeah, that's good. What we got?
You get version damage, right? 2 damage. So you succeed with 1 threshold, and then 2 the extra damage, plus the damage you're right. You can roll that.
3 strength, perception.
As you start using your deformed shield, these don't they're they got a simple she has block code, and they're starting to be missed.
It's funny, I'm seeing Dio say OMG yes, and I'm like, yeah, I'm glad that you, and then I realize, no, I'm looking at the chat in the session that happened before, not the chat here. Never mind.
So you fire. You told me that you hear it.
Scott takes a lot of notes. He is sort of like the self-appointed chronicler of these games. He's the one who writes the recaps. It's not something that I want to discourage, so if he's writing notes, I will try to give him the time that he can take to write them down. I don't take it as a lack of interest in game. I take it as something that he is specifically trying to maintain for the good of the game.
Okay, so round 2 is going to be very first.
Yes. Supposed to be high strength.
No, 3.
So, as the like, he's going to take so you can and it's just going to try and cleave between as many birds as he can to make create abilities. Then where you are, so,
Here the NPC is not attacking the enemy directly, but the shield. Remember, it's totally fine that he can be super badass attacking the shield. It's so that he can open it up for the players to strike the killing blow.
so he just 20 feet down. How many seconds? Let me know that. So 20 feet down.
Thank you, Eddie Sassery. Remember that I'll answer any questions that you guys have, but I also want to make sure that this is interesting for you. And if honestly I'm stalking too much, or if you're interested in something that happens later in the session, please let me know.
Back to the again. Okay, do it. Don't worry.
You see my body language right here? It's attentive, but I've got the sort of hidden nature in front of my face. This is an intentional piece of body language. I want them to see that I am considering, that I'm paying attention to them, but that I have some hidden things in up my sleeve.
So which chance you this time you're going to see?
But it doesn't have to move it around.
Okay, so you can shoot her, and you have reactions back. The blue reactions can counter and points. Probably each one of them. First, Molly. Molly's going to pass.
Oh god.
Well, if we were just watching the stream by itself, then this would just be a recap session. We don't really need that. But this is more about the thoughts that I'm having as we're going through and less about the specifics of the session. Later on, when there's some twists that happen in the story, we'll get a chance to listen to this session a bit more clearly.
Hour scene, day, week, month, duration is what it is.
So these birds are turning her off.
I mean, are they terrible? Like, are the birds still?
Oh, the birds you absolutely remember.
And there's
Birds are terrible. They're from the dream. They're attacking. They attacked you.
Yeah.
and there's an old lady.
I've turned the music off because I want them to focus on something.
You're not sure if she's born or not. She's carrying off by these birds.
Aragorn, I don't care if it's self-serving. Go nuts.
Well, I remember I was gonna shoot them, so I'm gonna shoot.
Okay.
Yeah, I look up at Zerzera and I think I just talked to her about the
Well, he's on his way down.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
He cleaves
Right.
birds
Okay.
to create an opening for this woman who's there. Both birds are holding her up. What are you doing? You can still cast your bird.
I am gonna cast it on the birds. Because the birds are bad.
Okay, that's a good thing to do.
I'm gonna point at the birds and I'm gonna scream at them as loud as I possibly can. You bring her back! Look at the
Oh my god.
Pretty much.
From.
I'm gonna dangle someone off the roof after this. The bird's like, this is not scary at all.
I swear to God.
Swear to me.
That's the best. I love that line.
We're making jokes because players are all now trying to prepare their next actions, getting dice together, figuring out their pools and all that. This is a time that I find is acceptable to make out-of-character jokes because honestly, they've got to refocus and we've got an audience to entertain. We're filling dead air.
So was my bunk because it was 2 rounds. Is that down 2?
Oh, that's a third level. For you.
Yeah.
Screen.
Yeah.
You.
Switch watch.
I'm shooting.
I'm going to use scene as well to get as many birds as possible. Oh, wait, reroll, because I forgot my dice.
Nightmare dice.
Okay,
Nightmare
6
dice.
successes. Okay, so pew.
Oh no.
That's a difficulty 5, right?
Yep, I didn't roll any 5s, but I had 6 plus for everything.
Ergwin, generally, anything that you've introduced into the game on your own volition is something that I'm like, I can work with this. There's never been a point where I'm like, she's done everything I wanted, and therefore I have nothing different to plan. But I wouldn't give you things if I didn't want to have to catch up or reestablish. You've never done something where I've been like, my game is fucked. But spoiler warning, I've never had a player do something in these games where I've just been like, I don't know what to do. The game is in a bad place now. That's never happened.
That take your thresholds.
That's 5. Is it diff 1?
It's -1.
Yeah,
1 to
so-
succeed and then
Yeah, great. That's what I thought.
So then
Plus 2 for the.
you go fire.
That's my last round of this, but yes.
Yep.
2 and actually damage.
So I rolled 5 successes on my burn reclamation, which means that birds that I hit cannot move or take meaningful physical action until they accumulate more successes than 5 using strength athletics.
Okay, so that's going to order.
Music comes back on. I probably left it off a little too long. I probably forgot to turn it back on, but now that they don't have to focus as much, music can come back. So if you had just rolled 5 successes, players need to feel good about rolling a lot of successes.
Most of the birds that are available are going to be killed by the bird.
Failed.
We do have an advantage, Pukajutsu, in that we are in the same location. For a long time, we weren't. For about 2 years, I was in Austin while the players were still in Montreal, and we had to read things through a screen. Not as easy as if you're in person. Not impossible, but not as easy. It is something that we have as an advantage over games that are audio only.
Yeah, it's nice.
One for cantrips. Just let's go.
Old lady, but bro needs to help people in need.
I think that my players would agree. The hardest sessions we've had to do were sessions where I had to phone in instead of video conference in.
Right?
8 successes.
That's it. Hopefully I roll better than last time.
Scott, you've been rolling your nightmare, right?
Yes. Yeah, I actually get very lucky with my nightmare.
Okay. No, I just rolled 6 dice and I
So
didn't
that's
get any 0.
there. You see, you fire the bullet, and this defenseless woman just bullet goes.
Rubric Wall, I'm going to address this directly. Rewarding PCs for high margins of success is one of those things that I have trouble with at times just because I can't think of an appropriate reward. You can always introduce more. If they roll a lot of successes to overcome an obstacle and you're like, fuck, that was the obstacle that I needed to like hold them in place for 30 minutes and now they've just gone past it, you can get another obstacle in there if you have to. But if your player rolls 10 successes and you're like, well, yeah, you make a small chip in it, but it doesn't do anything, then that feels horrible for players. And in the meantime, you've basically said, I want you to solve my puzzle the way I want you to solve the puzzle. Now, sometimes you've worked out really hard on a puzzle and you want them to do that, but then you have to set expectations for the players and say, I expect you to solve this puzzle in this specific way, as opposed to, hey, you can do whatever you want, and I'm just going to tell you it doesn't work. So, in general, if a player does really well in successes, then that's a great way to reward them. It's also a really great way that if you constantly reward them for a lot of successes and then one day they roll 8 successes and nothing happens, then they're like, oh shit, this person must be super strong, instead of, oh, you're fucking me over again like you always do. So that makes sense. I am completely out of water, and that is disturbing to me. Thankfully, I have help. Thank you.
And just blast under midsection. And feathers just erupt from both entry and exit.
For an improvisation GM as I am, it's very hard to destroy a game by an unseen action. It's not impossible, but in general, the reason why I'm an improvisational GM is that I don't want to let a game be destroyed by an action by either a player or a GM. I had to learn how to do this essentially because as I was running social LARPs here in Montreal, those LARPs came with other GMs who would take actions that I found really against my own sensibilities, but I couldn't let it drag me down.
Screams because you don't shot her hard.
Oh my
I
god.
wasn't aiming at her.
The tracers go. Oh,
Nice. Yeah.
that's good.
I was aiming at those birds. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with me?
I don't know.
Where am I? Where am I flying?
Why am I so bad shooting? Oh, goodness.
Right, so she's going to abort her action into something else.
Is it seal her feather wound?
She's got shot. So she So you see this coat, the coat that you created, just fall to the ground. She looks at you, and then just ice appears in her eyes. And she's going to fall.
Okay. This is the first moment in this session where I feel like I have to be very careful. I'm about to use an art on Patches, something that I don't often do because they don't often fight changelings directly, and when they do, I want them to be the one casting magics most of the time instead of me. In this case, though, I'm actually going to use an art to force Patches to feel fear. A very tricky situation. If you're ever forcing an emotion or an action on a player, they have to know that it's in the service of the story, and you have to make sure that they understand that they either still maintain some agency or that this is the equivalent of their character being knocked out or dead. I have never done this to Patches before. I've never done this to Kate before.
Sorry, is that me?
To a certain
Okay, sorry, I thought it was her.
certain way. So I have to be careful here of informing her what her situation is and making sure that she doesn't feel completely lost. But you see how the players are reacting, being like, oh dear? They should. This is a serious situation. I am ramping up the difficulty of this combat in the middle.
You want to try?
Yes, I spent willpower. Can I also spend a willpower to add
I
to
will
it?
let you do that, yes.
Great, if I need more willpower, okay.
Well, we're getting screwed up. Yeah,
One.
Oh, you
So
got
that's
one.
3 successes.
3 successes total?
Yeah.
Okay. So at this point now,
Robrick Wall, if they get 5 times as many successes as they need for a thing, sometimes I'll super exaggerate to show that they were like
I have
gilding the
extra actions
lily.
this turn.
Yes, you do.
I'm not scared. I'm gonna fly away.
And that's true.
They sound
Exactly.
like
I hate saying you feel fear.
Yes, it's not doing it.
This is the mental effect, right? Who has left to act? That's it for right.
Yeah.
Can I run and attempt to hide somewhere where I can still see the battlefield?
You can hide on top of the roof.
Right.
Hello.
Is this fear such that I can't even worry about my friends, or can I still be worried about my friends?
You may only take actions that are run, hide, or cower unless you spend willpower.
You'll notice that I'm checking the book. I don't need to. I know what this cantrip does. The reason why I'm looking at the book when I'm giving this information to Kate is to reinforce the fact that this is a game mechanic and not me fucking her over. Remember that Patches is also very low on willpower, as we established at the beginning of the session. Willpower is the only thing that she can use to resist the magic that I've given her, which means that I've put her on a very specific clock.
It does not let you take actions that help defense unless it's to drag them with you as you are running hiding back.
Okay. I'm hiding on top of the roof.
Okay.
I'm trying to make sure I'm not gonna get attacked.
Feathers are still just leaping from
Ergon's very correct. Fear is a mechanic in D&D, and it is not real. Much the same way that good and evil are mechanics in
I
D&D.
don't think I was supposed to do that. 12 again.
Well, now you might feel like it's justified because she's the thing that's right. It's very deliberately. It's not that you just feel fear. It's that you feel fear from her.
Okay.
It's not the same reaction. That's why you get
The fear cantrip is, if I remember correctly, it's from Winter. Or, yeah, I believe it's Winter.
So it's just. So Polly plays in her. She's going to take feathers. She's going to stand 7 feathers. That's right.
I'm clear.
You say weird.
Okay, you see Kate's expression right now? I haven't lost her yet, but I've put her in a difficult situation and she has to think about it. She's not looking at me the same way that she was looking at me before. I have to be aware of this. I'm not worried yet, I'm just aware.
That's right. That's respond to your I noticed Gigi.
And this is me. Oh, yeah.
You re-roll them at the same difficulty as the initial roll. Any further successes are added to the total, and any further 10s continue to be rolled. The 10s still count as successes as well. All
Liz has remembered that she has a mechanic that is super useful. And I want to make sure that they know what it does, because they haven't used it that often.
Yeah.
I was never physical. I did expect it to be. I rolled successes.
I'm actually going to scale. I just before. If you sail this building and try to pass on the roof.
Zero, seeing Patches tweet, Patty's like, what is going on here? He turns to his fairy ring. He's going to use the so good.
What about fairy? I know what I have to stay inside.
A fairy ring is you must stay inside the fairy
Cool,
ring.
then I'm scared of her and she's hiding, so I'm happy I'm not gonna do anything, because I'm still really scared.
Okay,
Cool,
that's
that's
fine.
my
You actually
turn.
no longer.
So, a thing that I have to be aware of. Kate has now said, I'm not doing anything. That's a dangerous thing for me to encounter as a GM. When a player says, I'm not doing anything, it generally means that the player is like, I don't know what to do. In this case, it's not quite that. but it's a warning sign that I have Trip for me. Any player who is starting to say, well, I have no idea what to do, or I'm not doing anything, is a lot different than a player saying I'm taking full defense or I'm going to maneuver to a better position. They're telling you that they've run out of options, and that's a dangerous thing.
You know she's there.
Oh, so she's going to cast it after my action. So my
You're
action
fine
is
to.
being scared of finding
You're fine to
something.
fight.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Do I need to roll a
No,
climb?
you don't.
I've also made it deliberately. I've also made a deliberate choice to make it so that she has actions that she can take, even though I could rule that the fairy ring that surrounds Marley is impenetrable, and that she can't disrupt it easily. I could do that, but I don't gain anything from it. It makes the combat harder, which I can do in other ways, but it also takes away options from players, which I don't like. And it also means that if I do that, then the next time that Sophia wants to use a fairy ring, which she has access to, then it's too powerful and I can't do anything about it. So I'm establishing things here.
Okay.
I have a
Weird.
bird.
Weird. Hiding. The rest of the birds are gone.
Yay!
But now Marley is inside a barrier.
Oh.
Round.
That's our prom.
Well,
13.
17.
Okay, 10. And Zeron.
You can't be the cool guy all the
I
time.
swear this doesn't happen very often.
I can't always have Zeron have an amazing initiative. I could fudge it so that he declares alongside the rest of the players to make it easier, but so. Erwin says it can also be an indicator that the player's frustration is starting to shut them down, which is what happens if you don't notice their response. Exactly. And frustration is not something that you want to see in your players. Frustration should last about 4 seconds, and then they can be like, but I know what to do. That means that you've given them a problem to solve. If the frustration lasts longer than that, then you're going to start losing them.
So Marley is inside a barrier and you can't see what she's doing. She's not leaving the barrier. It doesn't matter what
Yeah, I guess
am I
that's true.
still really afraid of her even though I don't see her?
you are experiencing fear for the rest of the scene.
Cool.
For now. Something they try to do something.
You're experiencing fear for the rest of the scene. Her answer is cool. Again, another warning sign for me. I can't let this go on for too long, even though that's the intention is to draw Patches out of combat. Kate's body language has changed, and her words have indicated that this is something that is troubling her. Not to the point where I think it's a problem, and definitely not to the point where I think that she's being unfair. But it's something that I have to be aware of.
And the birds are gone.
The birds are gone.
My
They're all
friends are
dead.
fine.
They were trapped by. And Zeron's just basically been
But she's still engaged. She's still asking me questions. That's a good sign.
moving back and forth.
Cool.
Static.
My friend is fine and she's hiding.
Yeah.
I will hide too.
I'm still in the vehicle, so she can reach.
And she's making jokes.
This is a helpless old woman in fairy ring?
Definitely.
Okay.
Although you did see Patches shoot her, and then you also saw her casting magic that seemed to make Patches hold her.
Would this be a roll maybe to make to determine if she's good or bad, or?
I think it's reasonable to assume that Patches probably would have shot her for no reason,
Okay.
and that she probably retaliated with Patches.
Cool.
But you just don't remember who she is or what she's for.
Okay. I want to fly down word for her.
Doesn't matter. It's just that your Bob's coat is sitting outside.
I know it can, so it's left inside fairy ring.
You see his coat line, right? But it just feels like
Sure. That looks exactly like it. I know what you can do. Can you do it for
Yeah,
you?
yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
Patches very good.
Players are also backing each other up, and they're making sure to keep Kate into it, which is good.
I'm gonna
I'm not saying that Kate is being unreasonable at all. She's actually reacting as a player should, and she's being very, very contributing towards the game, despite the fact that I just robbed her of agency. It's a good sign for a player, but it is something that I have to be aware of because I definitely don't want to end the session, have her come up to me and say, so I just sat there for 2 hours and I couldn't do anything, because that isn't fair, unless I discussed that with her beforehand.
all do inside fairy ring.
Rubric Walls says, while it's important to remember that managing players is a GM job, remember as a player to consider that bad options are still options, and they're often important ones. I know that's not part of the issue here, but I've run into a lot of players who think that they can't do anything if they can't use their highest powered mechanics. That is absolutely correct. There is an onus on players to be good players, and good players means good for the game and the story instead of for themselves. Thankfully, I have excellent players.
I see like powering fearful Patches. I don't know what happened to her. So I'm just gonna like shimmy along and land next to her. Just go, Patches, what happened to you? This is you. You are a dragon. You are a brave creature. And you can fly.
She's ready.
It hurts my heart. Braum is trying his best to reassure Patches. Scott is trying his best to do something right for Kate. But the nature of the cantrip is that she feels fear and it's supernatural. Braum can't just talk her out of it. But I still want to make sure that he feels like he's getting something out of it as well, so that he doesn't feel like he's wasted his time.
And like it'll hunt her if you like
So that is so you. What's it? You can look at the feeling strength.
It's okay.
Hey.
Now, you'll also notice that Kung Fu Fenris in the chat is talking about things like that would probably be unleashing. Isn't there a bunch of summer that can deal with that? He is providing direct advice to players. It's something that he does. Not all of my chat does this, but some of them do. I'm comfortable with it. If I ever had a major problem with it, I would tell a player directly, or an audience member directly. But in this case, I don't. There's an odd disconnect between if the chat isn't talking, it's either because they're enthralled with what's happening, or they're bored and they've left. So an empty chat is sometimes a very good thing, and sometimes a very bad one.
Yeah, I'm just gonna sort of like be there for her in this time. Yeah.
So Scott's realized that he can't help Kate because of this cantrip, but he's still rationalizing in terms of his character. An excellent thing for the player to support another player.
Roll me your charisma.
You'd like me to say something, though?
Thanks, Synesthesia Bladed,
Exactly.
or Synthesia Bladed.
One success. Okay, that's about right. That's about right. From you. Can you imagine if a single success to dispel this cantrip? Like, it wouldn't work at all.
Okay, so
I'm watching because if she reappears as a fairy, we're gonna have fun. But right now, I feel safest knowing that she's still there.
successes.
6. Shockingly.
The woman, now no longer leaking feathers, takes one step out, looks at you, and takes a single crystal of snow and floats it out.
That's my turn.
Oh, well. Bye, everyone.
Good thing you're master of the elements.
You got 2 open shields.
2 extra little open shields.
You can resist this.
Okay.
The point of willpower and a successful stamina roll, difficulty 9. She's using stasis.
Aha. I'm using stasis. I've taken Patches out of the combat, and now I'm about to take Sophia out of the combat as well. I'm about to take Sophia out of the combat in a serious way. I'm using a cantrip on her that literally puts her in suspended animation, and it will for a year. I didn't anticipate that I would roll as well as I did, but because I roll open, I have to accept the value that comes up. You can see that there's shock on faces of the players. This is a good shock because they also know that I'm not going to do anything terrible to them. But I'm taking Sophia out of combat in a way that isn't killing her, because I don't want to kill her, but I want her to experience the fact that if you come up against somebody who's flinging cantrips everywhere, and if she's flinging cantrips everywhere, that sometimes you can get got by that as well. So I wanted her to feel vulnerable, and clearly she's taking it well, so I'm timing it correctly.
The last time we saw stasis, it was to put Talus.
No.
Yeah.
Instead of
I
Gale
think that was unleashed.
Oh,
Yeah.
my stamina is balls.
So you can try to resist this by spending 1 point of willpower and rolling your stamina at a difficulty 9. You do not get to spend willpower, so you
It's fine,
can
'cause I wouldn't have any left anyway.
Everyone makes a very good point. Tactician inclinations don't like having their agency taken away a bit more than those who might be like, yes, I enjoy the horror of feeling supernatural fear and abandoning my friends so that I can have my character deal with that later.
So that's it. I'm gonna try.
Yeah, you have to try
I'm
it.
gonna try, man. Bye, everyone. Ah, so close. 3 and an 8.
Oh,
Close.
okay,
That's very close.
you are now frozen in Mystic Frost. So you are placed in stasis, you cannot act, you do not suffer damage, and you become completely inert.
And her gas, because
Supernatural powers or magic can thaw the magical frost putting the subject, but mundane heat or force does not break the barrier. Anyone attempting to undo the stasis must perform an extended action using the appropriate necessary might need.
So I'm informing them that to get her out of this will be very, very, very difficult. What I'm trying to communicate to the players, and you'll see in a moment that it doesn't work, is, oh yeah, level 5 Winter is definitely a strong opponent. Remember that she's one opponent against 3, and all 3 of them have access to level 5 arts. Liz is definitely, shit, what would they do without her? And hey, Alfarius, it's good to see you. Kate says, did I act too good? I was just trying to figure out what Patches should/shouldn't do. That wasn't just removing Restore the Seam and just splitting John's focus. See, Kate actually is a great player because she also knows that splitting my focus is not going to help the game any. So that's great. I was intending to have, in relating to the difficulty of trying to break this stasis, I was trying to get them under the impression that, like, you don't have Sophia anymore. You have to take care of the threat first.
Which means that you are in stasis for a year.
Okay, there
Unless
we
we
go.
accumulate 25.
Now, there's a certain amount of trust that she has to have in me by telling her you're in stasis for a year and not just being like, well, sorry, Liz, I guess you're not playing for a long time.
Successes on specific
An
extended.
extended role to the around.
Remember, I still have aphrodisia on myself, so y'all are really compelled by this.
Well, and you've invoked
This is a beautiful crystal.
Unless I'm mistaken, there's literally
Great centerpiece of the garden.
there's people in the city who look up and see a woman floating in like you've invoked the weird.
Yeah, but we're still in the
Yeah, we're
spot
about to
technically.
get
Like we're all
I'm going to you hear very, very soft and self-sound. That's the sound. That's something that just lower sound Okay, you recognize it on the system. You also adjust it.
I have to be careful about where my mic is pointed. If I point my mic away from my mouth, I don't get picked up. It's a problem. There we go. That should be a little better. While I'm here, I don't actually have access to my mic. I have access to a Blue Yeti, which still a decent microphone for streaming, but not the kind of microphone that I'm used to using. But I wanted to have a sound effect. I wanted to have that kind of like the grip sound of, well, it's not going to be picked up as well in here. But then I didn't turn the mic back to my face immediately, and I should have. I've changed the music again because I made it clear that combat has entered another phase, a harder one. They no longer have access to their best spellcaster. Now Scott's trying to think of what he can do here. So Scott initially was going to spend a point of permanent glamour to refill his glamour pool. Essentially, he was going to take what would cost 16 experience points. That's about 5 games worth to refill his magic so that he could cast magic again. I reminded him that there were other ways to refill his magic because I didn't want him to waste all of this experience when I knew that the combat was actually being pretty close to over, and I didn't want him to feel like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. So I reminded him. I also don't typically like having my players waste experience. There's something great about having a player make a sacrifice. They feel really good about it, but in this particular case, it was a sacrifice that I knew wasn't going to be that useful, so... I've also made sure to inform them that if a botch occurs, something really bad is going to happen to Patches. This is to set expectations again. However, he can't botch an athletics roll, so that's okay. Kate could potentially botch it. So Glamour is their power stat, you're correct. It's the equivalent of Rage or Blood. Or Gnosis is actually probably a better counterpart than Rage. Now Kate's happy that she didn't botch. It's always a good thing when you can make your players happy that they didn't botch, but that they're comfortable with a failure. What way does Braum use to get his glamour back? He's experiencing Revelry. Every Kith in 20th Anniversary Edition has something that they can do once a story to refill their glamour pool. In this case, Braum can use an athletic feat that reinforces his oaths in order to refill. the players run out of willpower, and I've realized that I have taken a bit too much away from them at this point, and I don't want to remove Kate from the battle. So I had the NPC take an action to give them each 1 willpower, which helps. Remember, if I've made a mistake, I can correct for it. And we're coming up on the first major twist of this session. Here, we're going to go back. We're going to listen to this entirely. Because this is the important moment. Okay, so I have just negotiated with Kate so that she can disrupt the fairy ring around the bad guy, essentially removing her major shield, which is fine. That's when this is where Scott's actually going to try to spend the permanent permanent glamour, and I remind him of how he can do that. But that's because he has an idea that I've been given an inkling of something that I can do with it. Okay. You can't hear the game audio anymore? We lost it. Probably when I fiddled with my Yeti. Okay, 1 second. Boop. Can you hear it now? Still no audio. Why did it all of a sudden cut audio? Because I'm still showing that audio is being put out in my mixer here. The video itself is not muted. I can hear it perfectly. What have you done to me, VLC? All right, we're at 1:14:49. Lazy. Can you hear it now? No. Still no. All right. Let's... Lazy is actually a program, I think. Still nothing? Okay, so then it's probably on Streamlabs side. So let's just put that back to here. Do that. So the audio output capture, I did anger something, I'm sure. Still can't hear it. So what I can do is I think I'll just delete and add this again. So delete this. I'm gonna add.
Oh, I will.
How's that? Can you hear that now?
Are the feathers weird or chimerical?
They're chimera.
Cool. Can I?
Okay, perfect. I have no idea why that happened, and that was annoying. I apologize.
Or some feathers out of the way, that would work.
All right.
Thinking of that wrong.
Okay, so here's what he's trying to do.
I'm gonna spend a dot of glamour to refill my glamour pool.
That's the action that would cost him a considerable amount of experience. Yeah, I'll turn them up.
So I can unleash Dragon's Ire. Skycraft? No, Dragon's Ire. And standing up on the, what I can only assume is like a gabled roof, it looks pretty cool, and kicking over one of the like stone masonry pieces.
I'm going
Yeah.
to recommend
Okay.
that there is a way for you to refill your glamour pool without.
So as soon as I say that he has another option, he remembers. This is because I don't want him to lose this glamour at this point.
Taking away a dot
Yes.
that you think about coming back to.
Thank you. Right.
So he's now thinking about it because I remember that I have to go back to Kate. I've already kind of asked her for things, and I've also realized I'm starting to lose Liz.
And you haven't used it this story.
That's right. Okay, that's so much better. Whew.
What is it? Are
Oh,
the
coming back to me.
Explain. Sorry, I'm excited.
Oh, I will.
Patches.
Are the feathers weird or chimerical?
They're chimerical.
Cool. Can I mooch them?
Yes.
Technically, that's a dangerous call for me to make, that a mooch can just disrupt this fairy ring. I feel comfortable doing it right now because I like the action and I like the fact that that Kate is still able to participate in this. And then I thought about it for a moment and I realized it's fine. I don't actually mind. If I ever need to make a fairy ring that I don't want the players to be able to fuck with, I can do it differently. In this case, it was a thin layer of feathers and I thought there's no reason for me not to let this go through.
Mooch, the
Are
whole thing's falls
they? What do they count as? Are they prop?
The fairy ring is currently being made of feathers that are scattered around the ground. If she breaks the ring, she breaks the circle, she breaks the fairy ring, is what I've determined for this particular action.
Are they being chimerical or are they
They're
chimerical?
going to count as Fey,
Cool.
and you have
Fey
Fey 3,
three? Yeah.
then you can do it.
And that is what?
Wrong.
Yes.
Very specifically, what you would have to do in order to refill your pool.
It's a troll thing?
It's a rebel.
Trolls gain them from tending to their oaths, but also from protecting and maintaining what they have. Troll might achieve revelry in some bottom like ways, like handing out
So
to
I'm
your children.
now making it obvious because he's figured out what he has to
Only
do.
might challenge Molly in football or against someone. No, probably not going to do that.
No.
But if you do something that I consider to be a feat of athleticism or battle, I will let you refill your glamour pool.
Okay.
What's your buff for your mooch?
Oh, I didn't bump before I rolled. So.
Thank you, Aldriff, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You did not bump.
I got. Well, the thing is, it's a success fail for mooch,
Yes.
so I succeeded.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I would.
The fairy ring warps out and then just shatters. And Marley is in there. You see that she's just stretching her claws across the bullet wound that you caused there, trying to just seal the wound up properly.
So I've given Kate a win here. Important because I've taken away some of her agency. It's also important because we are now an hour into the actual roleplay session. We're an hour 17 into the stream, and I want this combat to be over soon.
And then she looks like she's been caught in the shower. That's the fairy ring is supposed to be. But she's still nightmares. Right. Wrong.
My feat of athleticism and battle needs to be to challenge and hurl something at Marley. Or it's climbing down something really fast, but that doesn't seem as cool. So I think what I'd like to do is leap from this rooftop down into the garden, snapping off the largest branch I possibly can from a tree, and using that to propel myself, pole vault style, up towards Marley. I don't know. Does that seem? What do you think?
Let's see if it works.
Okay.
Only your dexterity athletics.
Actually fair.
Because if you face plant and nothing happens, you don't take your camera back.
Yes.
I'm making sure that he can't regain his glamour unless he succeeds at a roll. I want him to make this roll because I want him to realize that he has to do something extra in order to be able to take advantage of this rule. I feel very confident that he will most likely make this roll, and so therefore he'll feel cool about it.
And the point of
Watch me go.
No.
Oh, this was cool.
Oh, so Braun shouted for help in the exhaust and nobody came.
Never
I
actually
never got to it.
Oh,
Yeah, I
you
never got to
never
it. Wow. Diff 6 turn, or is it crazy?
This is a pretty. I'm gonna call this defeat.
3 successes.
I changed the difficulty to fate. I still think that because of the number of dice he rolls, he's going to be fine.
Success on a defeat. May refill your glamour pool. That's your one for this story.
Not anymore.
So Marley is now exposed. You're there. Zeron turns and just says, "Take her from us. We take time from you." And he is unleashing Kronos.
So, Zeron has thoughts about Sophia. If she fucks with Sophia to a certain degree, Zeron is going to react, and I have to make that reaction something important. So I'm going to unleash Kronos. I am deliberately making it clear that he has access to Kronos, which is something that I'm not sure the players recognized up until this point, or at least they may have forgotten. So that's learning something about their ally. It's also going to be something cool, but it's going to be something that isn't, again, directly something that Zeron is going to take advantage of.
That's so bad.
And he just shouts, "Stop her!" Like, it's cool. Let's see.
Come on, bud.
Can't wait for him to just turn into a baby. Do you know what I mean?
Oh
Like,
no!
So what a pretty
babe
baby.
Zeron.
Baby
Babe
Still
Zeron.
like glowing-
Yeah, just
golden
gorgeous. Like,
mom. Yeah, Curvy baby, like
2 successes.
I don't know.
yeah, it's probably like 60.
He controls the
Yeah.
unleash.
Oh, yeah.
So I only needed one success to make sure that this unleashing worked. The point is, if you get too many successes, then you lose control of the unleashing. We'll see that in a moment. But it means that I have to describe something that the NPC has deliberately added to this game. And I don't want it to be that he wins it for them.
Good. Excellent.
this is Evan Seacon.
So then she looks up, and then there's this moment where she just whoa. And just stops. Place.
So I stop the bad guy. I'm giving them a couple of rounds to react, and it's because I know that Patches can't do much because she's still under fear, and Braum seems, and I recognize that Braum is trying to fix Sophia, which I don't think will work. He needs 25 successes in order to get Sophia out of stasis. So I wanted to give them a chance to take that action and fail at it without disrupting the combat and making them feel like they've really fucked it up. So I froze Marley in place, basically giving them a free round so that they can make a mistake.
Marley does not get an action this round.
13.
It's me, eh?
Yep.
I'm going to unleash. Yeah, so, okay, so now I can, so I will. I'm going to unleash.
Zeron unleashed Kronos to stop Marley in place. Marley is the bad guy.
Dragon Fire. With all the like flames that I can spout from my mouth in my dream, anyway, I'm going to try to I'm going to shout to the dreaming to pointing at Sophia, free her.
So he's asked the dreaming to free her with an unleashing. An unleashing can't get a 25 success thing over there, and I don't want that to free her. But he is unleashing, and unleashing is a dangerous move. It's a chaotic move. It's something that I want him to be able to participate in. So I decide to let it play out and see what's going to happen.
Oh god.
Oh my god. Please don't kill me.
Well, you're unleashed.
Yep.
Ah, Jesus Christ.
Take a nightmare, 2 glamour. Roll your
Remember that it's 25 total successes that you need to free her.
I remind him to set expectations.
including missing. I
This
guess
will
that's
start becoming a miss. And it's not the successes you roll in the unleashing is not the successes you will act towards her.
I
But
get
it's,
a pocket roll.
but it's the equivalent of 25 successes. It's almost impossible for you to do this.
It just once that makes sense. Sorry guys, rolling.
Do we know how long this Kronos on Marley's gonna last?
Well, this is an unleash.
Um,
Probably not forever.
Am I still afraid of her even though she's frozen?
Yes.
Okay,
You are
great.
afraid of her until I tell you otherwise. Until the scene ends.
Great. If I forget who she is, will I still be afraid of her? I want to be able to mind myself. But if I don't think that'll work, I can do something else.
It's so cute. I love it.
Kate has come up with a very creative solution to get rid of her fear, but it still won't work. The specific mechanic is that she will experience fear for the rest of the scene, and she can do nothing but cower unless she spends willpower. So she might have been able to do something if she had eliminated her ability to feel fear, but she's fixating too much on the target. This is why I tell her that it's not going to work.
No, it won't work.
Okay.
It's a good try.
Yeah.
It's a good try.
Am I stopping afraid?
So,
And it's a good try, because I genuinely am like, that's a really interesting way of dealing with it, but it's not going to work this time.
Cool. In that case.
If somebody else used it on you, maybe.
Yeah.
You can't do it yourself.
Cool. So I'm spending my last willpower. That's my second imbalance.
Now, I see Scott's expression, and I know that something has gone wrong. Either he's botched, which I don't think is likely, given the number of dice he had to roll, or he's lost control of his unleashing.
And
Scott?
Liz has also noticed.
Scott?
Mm-hmm. I got 6 successes, which I believe is over my.
It means that you've lost control of your unleash.
And now I'm put into the first tilt. In this game, losing control of an unleashing means that you get what you want, but it goes wrong, that it goes too far, that something happens that's undesirable. You have lost control of your magic, and your magic has now become too prominent. And he specifically used Dragon's Ire to do this. And I think I might be able to use this. But it's going to take a really big leap of faith for myself. I think if I do something really, really off the wall, I can introduce something that will change the campaign for the next few sessions at least, and I can put Liz back in the game. However, I also know that if I do this, then I am basically asking one of my players to do a dramatic shift, and I am going to also pull focus away from everything else and put it onto her. That's something that I thought about, and I have to think about it fast because I cannot wait. But I have to think, is the game at its current, is the story at its current so essential that I don't want to fuck it up? And the answer in this case is no. I feel like the game can support me throwing a little bit of chaos in here. And I want that unleashing to feel like it hurts. But I also don't want to damage Sophia as a result. So instead of his Dragon's Ire freeing her from stasis, the Dragon's Ire does something else.
What was your specific sentence that you stated?
Free her. I don't know, that's
This is me considering.
I don't.
Why would you character this? You're like, bro, I'm gonna get pizza after this, man. I think, no, people have salad afterwards.
Now I need time. So I need time to figure all of this stuff out. So in this case, what I've essentially said is, I'll get back to you.
You're Scott.
I'm thinking about it here.
I'm used to thinking my character. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, that's alright. I appreciate you trying.
Nope, here's somewhere. Armor sorry, only gives me black. Okay.
I'm checking the chat to see if they have any ideas too, because I can always steal something if I have to. But I'm liking the idea that I've come up with.
So this has to
Turn
count.
on. Yep. Nice.
You can see that?
That's a no idea.
2017. That was
dark.
God, what
I need to apply a microphone.
Yeah.
Are you turned on the microphone?
Oh, I heard, yeah, but
Yes,
still.
hot.
patches.
Guess I'm just going to shoot her with a regular old rifle bullet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not too burn.
You can roll that. Zeron is going to walk directly up to. Zeron's going to walk directly up to Braun. He's just going to take Whisper's hilt, draw it, and whip it at Marley.
That's fair.
But first,
I didn't lose it, but he's allowed to lose it.
What, can we see that gift? Is it possible?
Toss it into the fire.
Shoot her!
No.
Oh, God.
So two.
she can't dodge.
Yeah,
So 2
two
successes.
successes, yeah.
Right? Roll your damage.
Hi, bud.
Now I'm having my NPC intercede. I'm having Zeron take the sword and throw it into Marley, partially because I want to make it clear that Marley is screwed. She can't move currently, and there's still characters around who can move, but I also now no longer want this scene to be about Marley. I want it to be about Sophia. So I'm being very delicate, and I'm taking my NPC and interjecting him into the story. But because he's been supporting characters all along, he's kind of earned the right to do some damage.
Move, you're just in time.
Somebody could Puka update, please. I just really want to read your synopsis.
That, and also, Patches has just thrown 6 damage at Marley, which I could, at this point, fudge the numbers and say that that's enough to kill her. But since 6 damage is a lot, it means that if Zeron does something to kind of help it along, it's not stealing too much from the characters. Patches puts out a lot of damage when she succeeds at rolls because she's using a rifle, so I can count on her to make damage stick when it counts.
Another bullet. More feathers start spilling out under the ground. She doesn't react. She doesn't move. And then Whisper just. Let's try that actually.
Whisper.
So you know the hole that you just made with the bullet?
Oh no.
The sword just comes out and just like right in that hole, and then just comes out the other end. So that now she's got the blade buried within her, and he starts moving towards it with purpose.
Whisper is a magic item that in this game you can choose to destroy something as long as the sword is inside it. However, Once you choose to do that, it starts pulling from your glamour. If you have no glamour left, it starts pulling directly from your health. It's a very dangerous maneuver for something that's complex. It's easy for something like a door, but difficult for something like a living creature. I don't want Zeron to die in this case. I want to give the players a thought as to whether any of them could do it, but since all of them are low on glamour at this point, they can't activate Whisper.
Hi, Liz.
Hi,
Let's go.
I'm so good. How are you?
This is where I'm going to start revealing the tilt.
Um,
So I'm specifically addressing Liz, making sure that all the players can have their focus on her because this is important and they need to know.
You feel fire starting to burn inside you. It's the only thing that you're aware of right now is heat and flame inside you. Because previously you were nothing. Stasis. You can feel heat, warmth, heat around you.
Because this is such a significant tilt, I'm spreading it over several rounds. I know that the combat is basically over, and I'm not worried about the players. Or the player characters, I should say. What I am focused on is making sure that this moment is going to be cool not only for Liz, but for everybody at the table, and the audience as well. So I'm not introducing it all at once.
I'm sorry.
Marley is going to move this turn. She does have an action to take, and her initiative is 16. Zeron's is 11.
14?
15.
So Zeron's action is going to walk up, try to place his hand on the hilt of the sword.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I'm running away again. Or,
Marley's action is going to be to look down, rip the sword out of her, and jump off the edge of the building.
I can't preempt that action.
Yes, you can. You have a higher initiative. That's fine.
Oh, I missed that. Sorry.
Wait. Yes. What was your initiative?
Right.
I'm just going to note that Aragorn throws out her very specific. Marley was like, my coat. And Patch was like, nah, but okay, teehee fakey. And then Sophia was like, airform. And then Marley was like, not real coat. And then everyone was like, new crone who dis. And then Braum threw everyone. And then Sophia was like, ha. And then Marley was like, hold still. And Sophia was like, frozen. And then Zeron was like, freeze, Kronos. And then Braum was like, free her. And then he lost control of his unleashing. So that's an interesting thing to throw out there. But we haven't seen what the unleashing result is yet.
hold the tape.
It was 15. It was 15.
Yeah, hers was 14.
I have 14.
Right, great.
I've deliberately said that Marley is going to try to escape this round, but her initiative is very low. I wouldn't have made her try to escape if her initiative was high, because I want this combat to end. So, and I at this point, I don't need this character any longer.
Oh, I can't wait to read
You know
it.
what? I don't remember.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that someone in the chat. You know what? It's your lucky fucking day.
Hey, my
Okay. Yeah. You're welcome.
Okay. Oh.
What is it?
It is 12.
Okay. Hers is 11.
Oh.
So
Now, I forgot what the initiative is. I lost track of initiative. So, you know what? In that case, we just re-roll. It's fine. And if Scott feels like he got away with something, then that's great. I'll let him feel like he got away with something because I want him to feel good. I don't need to be right. I need the players to feel good.
So have you established what she's intending to do?
Yeah.
Your action.
My action is going to be to move to her and to try to grapple her so that, like, to try to stop her from
Are you
moving.
trying to tackle her, or are you trying to grapple her?
Grapple her so that she's still upright with the sword hilt facing Zeron.
Okay.
And place a hand on the hilt as well.
Right, so you are attempting a whole strength roll.
That's
Two
okay.
dudes, one sword. What?
Oh, wait, no, you're taking
It is.
You ever seen the strength roll for this?
Okay.
Marley was like, my coat! And Patch was like, nah, okay, TT Fiki. And then Sophia was like, and Marley was like, not real coat for her. And then everyone else was like, new crone who dis. And then Braum threw everyone, and Sophia was like, ah. And Marley was like, hold still. And Sophia was like,
Oh, right.
And was like, freeze.
I
And Braum was
recapped
like,
it as well here.
Braum's unleashing.
Yeah, pretty much. Adorable. Strength roll. So that's it.
Okay, so she's rolling strength roll as well. Oh, interesting. This might actually work.
It's
3 successes.
Might not be so good on me. Oh, no, there's 10s. There's 10s and I can double them, so 5.
You.
Carry.
Okay, you hold that. Zeron walks up, and he places his hand on the hilt. Could destroy her.
So the arm shoot's done. Missed.
So, Zeron has asked the player characters, I could destroy her. What he's doing is I'm essentially saying, look, the combat's over. You've already won. But because Zeron is the one in the position to actually drive the sword up based on the player actions that have happened so far, he needs permission from the PCs to do so. And he just got it from Braum.
I don't like it, Zeron. But we must. I will if you won't.
Can't let you do that.
I fade the
Instead,
music.
he twists the blade and pushes up.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
And then,
Or I don't fade
and
the
she
music, sorry.
disappears in a cloud of feathers. A huge cloud of
I bet.
feathers that just wash on the ground itself. And then you can see underneath it, there's an essence of a chimera. Not fully extinct, but still there, lying on the ground, still with Whisper, just like holding it down in place.
Okay, so combat is essentially over, which means now it's time for me to reveal the tilt. So I've changed the music back.
Fire and flame. You can feel the frost around you. It's starting to crack.
I want to give Liz a good moment here.
Feel yourself twisting. It's painful, but not in an excruciating way. The kind of pain that you feel after a long workout, the kind of pain that you feel when you're pushing yourself that last kilometer of a marathon. Your breath is fine. And then, as you look, by the way, it seemed over.
So I'm no longer
You're
afraid
no
of.
longer afraid. You see the frost around Sophia starting to vibrate extremely quickly. And then it crashes open as Sophia's body transforms into an iridescent scaled dragon.
What I did here was I took a character and I decided to, because this unleashing means that something is going to get out of hand, I'm going to put her in an interesting spot. I am going to deliberately give her far more power than I should. I'm going to make her into a dragon. A dangerous, dangerous choice. I trust Liz to be able to do something with it. But in this way, I make it so that the unleashing is an important moment of the game, that it feels like I didn't just throw it away, and that if I was going to immediately release her from a 25 success stasis, it had to be something major. And yeah, you can look, right? The players clearly were not expecting this.
I mean, Cyrus can talk.
And I'm going to let dead air happen for a little bit because I'm going to let the players' reactions speak for themselves. I do not need to talk here. I need them to react to what I just said.
I think Cyrus can talk English, so I know
Oh,
what you
Sophia's no
mean.
longer moving.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
You are about the same, and you're growing, you're continuing to grow, you are about the same size as Scythe. Your skin is of ruby.
And am I awake now?
Yep.
The 25
You're starting to come
Oh,
around.
okay.
And then just copper slams around you, then steel, then any kind of metal that you can think of, and it fuses into the skin that just writhes around you, the scales pouring out of your body, encasing you in this armor, and you can feel your breath is still hot.
God damn.
And the Chimera, still being pinned by Whisper, starts to cough.
I'm gonna fly down from the roof.
Yeah, you're
Right,
right.
yeah. I guess I'm gonna make sure.
Now, because now the danger is past, the music immediately shifts to something quite a bit different.
That his toast done. So I guess I'm gonna head over to Zeron and this Chimera.
By the way, you now remember who she was.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's good.
Zeron is distracted.
Well, no.
I don't want the NPC's reaction to be the thing that's important here. I want it to be the players' reactions, because the players are the protagonists. So yeah, Zaren's allowed to just be stunned and look at this and be like, what the fuck just happened?
Oh, shit. Very carefully, I would say. Sorry, old joke.
The music is also indicating that they're no longer in danger and that they don't have to immediately deal with the chimerical essence that's sitting on the ground here. Because, again, I want the focus to be on the fact that Sophia's a dragon.
You are, by the way, still fully conscious. You remember what happened. You don't remember what happened to you. You remember being put into stasis, and then you remember suddenly busting up and coming back. You don't know what happened in between.
Excellent.
Braum doesn't know what he's done, so he's gonna take a knee at
Well, you
the.
totally know that you unleashed
Well,
Black Iron and lost control.
I guess I more mean like more in the context of like what have I done, you know? Oh shit! He's just gonna take a knee at the sword tip of Whisper and look down at this chimerical thing and try to keep an eye on the dragon.
She doesn't look like she's gonna start breathing fire on all of us, then
Well, see, that depends. She's never been a dragon before.
she doesn't
What am
look
I
angry.
doing?
So I'm going to ask you to roll
Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Is that anything?
your straight wits and a difficulty.
Now, I want to introduce Sophia being a dragon gradually. I want to make sure that she has, that she realizes that she doesn't have access to every power that she could possibly have right away. So I'm making her roll just even so that she can control the flame breath that she now has.
No successes. That is not a botch.
So, at least, at some point, the first time that you are let out a long breath, it is going to be fire that ejects from your mouth.
And I'm attacking the players with it. I have this resource available to me because none of the players have actually suffered any damage. Even though they feel like they've been through a rough a rough go of things, they in fact only got fucked with in terms of magic and emotion, not damage. So I can roast them a little bit with Dragonfire, just to show that Sophia isn't in total control yet.
So I'm going to ask, what's wrong?
Yeah.
Roll me your dexterity and athletics to dodge a thin but yet powerful burst of flame emanating from.
Powerful. Right.
It's fair, it's your fault.
It sure is. 3 successes.
When I rolled the one die to see which player I was going to target with the flame, I didn't actually set anything. I rolled the die, looked at the result, and realized that I wanted it to be Braum. It's sort of like flipping a coin, and then when it lands heads and you realize that you wish that it was tails, you know what it was supposed to be all the time. It's the same thing with the die.
Okay, roll me your stand.
So Adi Sasori, she no longer has She Beauty, but she can still cast cantrips.
Yeah. Can I soak with armor?
Yep.
Then I will. 5 successes.
You don't take any damage, but you definitely feel a little singed.
So he doesn't take any damage because I don't want him to. He also rolled high on his soak, so that's fine. But like honestly, it's not about the damage. It's about what's going on with Sophia.
You can stay out of her breath path. Haven't seen that.
Is the weird still invoked?
Oh, sure.
Yay! There's
You like that?
on. What of her? Let's deal with her. Then we'll take care of Sophia.
So Kate's being logical. She's like, hey, so Marley still exists. She's down there. We got to deal with this because she doesn't want the bad guy to spring back up again. Thank you, Kate. This means that I can close the scene out. And thankfully, Liz is going to pick up on it and do exactly what I was hoping.
This small, sort of twisted bird that's down below starts to sing. The singing is beautiful. Very beautiful. Just a sad and yet alluring song. I want all of you to roll your willpower, please.
Now, previously, in an episode before this, there was a question as to whether Marley was a bad guy or not, and whether it was Sophia's father who forced her into being evil. Here, I'm trying to imply that, yeah, Sophia's dad didn't exactly do a great thing, but that Marley was always the equivalent of a siren, and I'm making them roll willpower knowing that they're going to easily get it, or even if somebody fails, they aren't all three of them going to fail. I'm giving them a clue at this point that to help further this story along.
That's cool.
Permanent
Yeah.
willpower. Your difficulty is 8.
I'm really hoping that doesn't need dragon down too. Like, the same as Mario.
I assume that you left Matt here for figure out a battle.
She's having a nap.
Yeah,
Anymore.
successes 1, 2, 2. So you feel for a moment this irresistible pull to help her, but not just to help her, but to lift her up, to cradle her to you, walk away with her. And then you recognize that it's a supernatural nature. It's her last ditch attempt to try to get you to do what she wants. Is a beautiful song. There's definitely something sinister.
I would like to breathe fire on this chimerical creature that's pinned down.
That's what I wanted. I wanted Sophia to be the one to kill it. Because Sophia is the one who originally encountered this creature before. I did put her in stasis, I took her out of the combat, but I do want to give Sophia that closure. So I wanted her to,
Okay, roll me your dexterity.
throw that
Fire
out.
arm?
I'm actually going to say athletics.
So I like, in that moment of realization that there's evil hidden behind the beauty, I get like a new purpose, and I want to land with a big thunderous crash and really like
Little one, by the way, is gone.
let her rip.
Chief Leaks.
I remove Little One from the scene. Ostensibly, it's because dragon versus dragon makes things difficult, and I don't want them to have another dragon to deal with at this point. But it's also because I want to clear away unnecessary NPCs. I want things to reset so that it's, again, focus on players.
Let her rip.
So you see, Zeron has only enough time to like stumble backwards and away from it, holding Whisper as just like this gust of flame comes up, and then the feathers that are surrounding this little bird become its pyre, and it vanishes completely. Oh, your smoke and mirrors stops. By the way.
So, vanishes completely. Vanishes completely means there's no corpse. It also means that if I really wanted to, I could bring this NPC back. No body, not necessarily dead. I'm not going to. Marley is dead. This wasn't supposed to be a recurring villain. I kind of had my fun, or they had their fun with it, and now it's sort of done. But I give myself an out if I have to, because sometimes a player will mention something and I'll be like, fuck, I forgot, and I have to go back to it.
There's nothing more than finish.
Okay. At this point, we're about halfway through the session. I feel like things are rolling well, so I don't necessarily want to offer a break to the players right now because I want to keep things going. However, it does mean that this is probably a good time for me to break here because we've been going for 2 hours, and if we go through the rest of the session, it's going to be another 2 hours, and that's longer than I had planned for this. But I think that if we stop here, we can pick this up again, and we can look at it now, instead of it being from combat perspective, now we can look at it from a non-combat perspective. So this is the equivalent of our deep dive. This is how we're doing it so far. You can totally ask. I'm now taking questions, I guess, is really the key. We're not gonna progress further in the thing, but I'll answer questions for now, and then we'll close the stream out. But if this is something that's interesting for you, if this is something that you're appreciating, then let me know. And let other people know. I'll try to make the VOD available. I mean, the VOD will be on Twitch, but I'll try to make it available on YouTube because I think that people will be interested in this. Of course, I'm not recording it locally, so I'll just have to export it. But if this is something that people are interested in and interested in seeing me continue doing these deep dives, then I can. I just have to know. And obviously, if there's other things that you want to see a deep dive on, then you just have to let me know. There's been a few things out there, but yeah, so far this is I think that if we continue doing some RPG Clinic stuff for now, it's actually going to be these instead of just straight Q&As. So AD Sassery, if you have any questions or if anybody else has any questions, please throw it down. Yeah, live examples have worked. I just don't know why. I was nervous doing this before. I was kind of worried that it'd be too much showing the man behind the curtain, but you have to be able to trust yourself, and you have to be able to trust in the process and hope that people knowing about it isn't going to ruin the magic too much. But I also don't think I'm spoiling anything for people who are current, and nor am I really spoiling anything major for people who aren't current. Format. Oh, you're formatting a question. Cool. It's useful material for anyone who needs GM advice and nothing else to find. Comparing, contrasting, and self-reflection helps out a lot too. Yeah. No, honestly, I totally get that. Totally understand. A lone dog barks in the distance. I suppose maybe I can throw some music on while we're waiting for this. We can Wolf of the Shining Path, I appreciate it. About to attempt gemming for the first time. Hear about this playthrough from this perspective. So this is specifically from an improvisational perspective. I had nothing of this planned. Like turning Sophia into a dragon was completely off the cuff because of a failed unleashing. The way that this combat was going to end, again, I thought that Marley was probably had a solid chance at winning this. So the fact that they came up with some really interesting strategies, I wanted to give them that victory. But again, that wasn't planned. So you'll see more about the improvisational side when we move on to the second half of the session. But this is not necessarily the best way to GM. It's the way that I GM. And honestly, if I can find some ways to help people see what my thoughts are and how they might be able to develop their own improv styles, then I hope that's cool that they can do that. Weirdness, STing has always been a scary, almost unknowable thing. STing it's not, so I am constantly worried, constantly focused on trying to make sure that everybody's having a good time. And in that, there's a little bit of stress, admittedly. And I'm my own harshest critic. I'll often end a game and be like, I don't know if that went well, even though everybody's saying that it did. And for all I know, maybe that's the truth. But people seem to keep coming back. And the thing that I've learned most about when you run games is that if you are running games and you're enjoying it, people will come back. And that means that you're doing it right. However, you need to do it. It would be interesting to do a collab with a player, maybe going back to Exalted, since that's a closed game, to talk about how they were thinking in response. Yeah, that actually could be a really interesting thing to try, everyone. I understand that. Yeah, I was here the whole time. Dio, it's date night. Go do a date. I've always enjoyed improv sessions as a player much more. See, I think that there are advantages to improv sessions in that it gives the players a lot of agency in how the story moves forward, and that's what I want to give the players more than anything. I want the players to feel like they're the stars. And while I know that a lot of people associate the games of Exaltwitch and Changeling and Full Party with me specifically because I'm sitting in the storyteller's chair, it's actually the players who make that game great to watch. I do my absolute best to give them all the tools they need to be awesome, and that's what I want to see. You're waiting for him to get home. I'm very interested to see where they first met Saul and had the run-in with the father. Yeah, that's actually a really good one. That one's especially good because I almost killed a PC, which is something that I do very, very rarely. And it's interesting to see how we can do that. That's also, a couple of years ago now, so who knows? Maybe I've changed significantly since then. Ooh, we're not listening to that. Holy crap, I can't believe I still have that. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So my players got inside a Baylor embassy in order to find and talk to a judge and NPC, yada yada yada. They got into a very hard fight, and the rest of the 4 NPCs at the Baylor embassy want to stop them because they chimерically killed one of them. They have a clericon with a shotgun outside if they need to help. How to make the clericon enter the scene without it feeling like a Deus Ex Machina. I think that what you can do is you can have the clericon half enter. In other words, have the clericon enter and not just be like mow everybody down, but have the clericon enter and fuck up. Like have the clericon enter and they're injured, or have the clericon enter and trip, or have the clerk, depending on the mood of the scene, have the clericon enter not immediately solving everything, and if the players give the clericon just a little bit of help, then they can help. Then the clericon can help them get out of it. So instead of them just kicking down the door and being like, everybody's fine because Deus Ex Machina, now it's, I've given you a tool, you have to use this tool. Give a player a tool, let them figure out how to use it so that they can feel good, even if it's an NPC who's ostensibly doing the thing. That's how I would do it so that it didn't feel so much like Deus Ex Machina. Because admittedly, you want to avoid as much as possible putting the PCs in a situation where all hope is lost and then being like, well, now an NPC is going to get you out. Because at best it feels like, oh, I fucked up, so I'm canceling my fuck up by having an NPC save you. And at worst it feels like, well, the players suck, but the NPCs are cool, which is never what you want to have feel. The players should never feel like they suck. They should feel like things have gone wrong for them, that they've been unlucky, or that they've made choices that have gotten to them to this situation. Because some players really enjoy messing up. But it should feel like that's agency. You can't take the agency away from the players. Yeah. Also, you said that they recruited and reward that forethought on their part. That's totally useful as well. That's a great idea. Still any other questions? Because I imagine that I've got some dinner that I can eat, which would be super awesome. But yeah, if this seems like something that people enjoyed, let me know here. Tweet about it too, so that other people can know if they want to look at the VOD. And yeah, we'll come back and we'll do the second half of the session or other scenes that are interesting. There's another thing that happens in this session that I think was really important at the end, both involving Liz and Kate. So I do want to get back to that, but I want to spend the appropriate amount of time with that, and I can't do that right now without super overshooting my time. So there's that. So I'm glad that people enjoyed it. Between the ZOMODM's attributes video, I can't wait for next Tuesday game. See, like, yeah, just enjoy and play your own damn games. Be unafraid of failure, because if you surrounded yourself with the right people at your table, they'll put up with your failures. I have failed so many times in Changeling, in Exaltwitch, and in Full Party, and my players support me. They will support you too. As long as you're open and you use your damn word hole, that's the helpful part. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll remind everybody that on Friday, there's still Punchy. On Saturday, there's going to be a stream, but I think it might be a solo stream, ? But on Sunday, there is Changeling, so you can totally tune in and check that out. I'm looking forward to it. And I just hope to see all of you there. See you next time.